The last set of things you're going to want to take into account when picking out your first stand-up board, other than what is the function and the kind of the overall performance and what kind of dimensions are you looking at, is what is the shape of my board and how is that shape going to influence performance. For me, just to simplify it, I break down shape into 4 categories. You got the shape of the nose, you got the shape of the tail, you got the shape of your rails, and then you have what's called your rocker line, or that banana shape to the board. In the stand-up paddleboard world and the surfing world in general, you're going to see 2 kinds of noses. These are the 2 kinds of noses in general you're going to see. The top board is our 7/8 Ninja Ripper. You can see it's a much more pointed off nose, pulled in for optimized surfability from a maneuverability standpoint, whereas the board on the bottom is our 10/0 Paradise model. This board to me has a classic longboard shape, full nose, just a full outline, which is going to offer stability in flat water conditions and offer nose riding abilities in surfing performance. For surfing, I would say this kind of nose, a pointed off nose, is great to just optimize how easy it is or how responsive the nose is. Whereas this kind of nose decreases the amount of stability the board has, so you essentially need to be a slightly more skilled paddler or surfer to be using these kinds of noses. Whereas this kind of nose on the bottom, the fuller nose or the fuller outline to the nose, offers more stability from all the added surface area that you got. For surfing, it's going to inhibit how quickly you can maneuver that board left to right, but in the surf world, it's going to enable you to do some nose riding performance. In the flat water paddleboard world or just the recreational paddleboard world, a full nose like this offers more surface area, which results in more stability. More surface area means more contact with the water. It's going to make it a more stable board. Any nose in between, I mean, you can have hybrid shaped noses that aren't pointed like this but aren't completely full like this. It's just going to be a combination of those depending on how pointed it is or how full it is. The second point when you're looking at the shape to consider is, what is the shape of my tail? These tails are somewhat similar in the sense that they're rounded pins or kind of a thumb-shaped tail. In the stand-up world, to me, I normally notice 3 kinds of tails. You got your rounded pins or your thumb tails, and then you have what's called a squash tail. That's just a flat tail at the bottom, so it's if I took this nose or this tail and just chopped off the bottom, it would give us that flat surface. The other kind of tail that you'll usually see in the stand-up world is a swallowtail. Tails are all about kind of how the board's gliding or how much control you're going to be able to generate while you're surfing. The more surface area the tail has, so kind of like that squash tail that you guys are looking at over there, the more surface area you have, whether it's a squash tail, whether it's a swallowtail, the more that tail is going to plane across the surface of the water when you're just recreationally paddling. In the surf, a fuller tail or a more surface area on the tail kind of loosens up the tail and enables it to plane across the surface a little more. On the flip side of that, these kind of tails where you got a thumb tail or you got something of a rounded pin tail, they create a little more bite when you're surfing on the face of a wave. That tail's going to submerge in the face of the water and just generate a little bit more hold instead of having a squash or swallowtail that's going to kind of plane across the surface, kind of like you're power sliding. In terms of flat water or recreational paddling, these kinds of tails have decreased surface area, which means they just sit a little deeper in the water. It's going to create a little more drag than a squash or a swallowtail would, but it's kind of negligible for the people that are doing recreational stuff. Mostly these tails are good for optimizing control in the surf. As we discussed when we were talking about the thickness of the board, the rails of the board and how those rails are designed is very influential for how that board's going to perform. I mean, like this board on top as an example, this one is a 4-inch thick board. This one on the bottom is 4.5 inches thick. But if we look at the shape of this guy right here, if I pull my hand out, that's the kind of shape we're looking at for the rail, whereas this one, I mean, we got a big boxier shape. So even though these boards are 4 inches thick on top, 4.5 inches on the bottom, because the rail design is a little different, it's definitely going to impact the performance of the board. In general, for rails, you're going to see either big, kind of boxy, thicker rails. A big, boxy, kind of thick rail is going to look something like this. This is our 10-2 Easy model, so that's going to provide a lot of stability because of how much volume you have pulled out to the very width of the board. Whereas if I take this shape, so I'll just take that shape off that rail, and I compare it up to this guy, I mean, we can see that because this is decreased volume over here, we're losing all of that volume. This kind of rail is not going to be nearly as stable, but the advantage of this kind of rail is optimized surfability. So the way to think about rails is the bigger, thicker, boxier the rail is, the more volume and stability the board's going to have. Whereas if we can taper out that rail, kind of thin it out, that's going to optimize the surfability. The fourth point to consider when addressing the shape of a board is to consider the rocker line. If you don't know what the rocker line is, it's just that banana shape to the board. In general, you're going to see on kind of high performance surf stand-ups a lot more rocker in the nose. This is called your entry rocker, or your nose rocker. You can see that this nose kind of flares up a lot more over here. Whereas on bigger kind of recreational cruise boards, just kind of flat water boards, you're going to see a shallow or a softer entry rocker line. Same thing with the tail rocker line on the top board, because it's kind of a high performance shaped surf stand-up. There's a little more tail rocker. You can see that kind of flare up relative to this guy. And then on the bottom board, our 10-0 Paradise model, it's kind of a decreased tail rocker. It's a little flatter. The way to think about rocker is it's all about the glide of the board. If this is the surface of the water and I have a lot of rocker in my board, as this board is trying to move across the surface of the water, because this angle in the front is so strong, it's actually pushing water forward. Whereas if we can flatten that rocker line out a little bit, now we have the ability to glide across the surface and decrease drag. So in terms of flat water recreational paddling, as long as you're in calmer conditions, a flatter rocker line is a little more advantageous. I mean, you don't want the rocker line to be completely flat, because now you're going to inhibit the ability for that board to plane. But you want to decrease that bend, just kind of flatten it out to optimize how much glide you can generate. For surf-inspired stand-ups, especially if you're surfing bigger waves, a higher entry rocker just enables you to get into the wave later, while still enabling for that nose to plane so that you don't pearl that thing. Rob just put together a really good video covering some of our race models, our 14.0 Bump Rider and our 14.0 Dark Horse model. If you want to go into some of the details on the rocker line, definitely check out that video. But in general, the flatter the rocker line, the more conducive it's going to be to optimizing glide in terms of recreational paddling. Whereas the more entry rocker you have, the more it's going to inhibit the glide of the board for just flat recreational type paddling, but the more surf oriented it's going to be. If you like this video or any of our other videos, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube. It really helps out the business. This is Kevin Fung with Blue Planet Surf. Thank you for watching. Please check out all of our other YouTube videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you on the water. Aloha.